Today is obviously Rav Aharon's yahrzeit. You, me, all of us are Talmidim of Rav Aharon. Now you think to yourselves, but I'm not, I never met him in my life. The answer is, if you learn in this yeshiva and you're a Talmud of Rav Tarragon and Rav Mordechai or Rav Kay or Rav Schreiber or Rav Bick or Rav Rhein or anybody else, you're a Talmud of Rav Aharon. And so you have every right not just to know about him, but to feel close to him. And I'm very, very grateful to Rav Rhein and Rav Bick for agreeing to do this. And hopefully the memories they share and the insights they share will help you connect to the person who is all of our Rabbi.
Shalom to you all. It's been 6 years since Rav Aharon passed away, and there's been a lot written about it. You hear about it through books and stories and all sorts of different things. But as Mrs. Lichtenstein said today to me, Shir Vav already didn't know him. Through the later years, his health was declining. The older Shir also didn't, until he stopped coming to Shir. But in other words, after he stopped giving Shir, he was coming in every day also, just as an institution to see him. And I think it's a tremendous chaval. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. That's what happens in life and death. You weren't able to experience, Ellie said, which is a nice thing. You know, we're all Talmidim because our Rebbeim were Talmidim. Not always the same. And you don't necessarily, I'm sure the different Rebbeim tell a lot of stories about Rav Aharon, about his greatness and things like that. What I want to do is I want to start with different shlavim. The earlier shlav that my connection with Rav Aharon was, I came to Yeshiva University, YU, as a freshman, 1966-67. I come from a yeshiva that was serious. I thought it was serious learning. I remember my Rebbeim were there. They were very knowledgeable, very great. But the whole thing was different. There, you learned the Gemara. Whatever it is, you would go shir, and the Rebbe would tell you what different Mefarshim would say on something. Never inside. It was just something, if you wanted, you wrote it down on the side or in a notebook, but it wasn't yours, it was given to you from somebody else. You come to YU, and I guess I was fortunate also to know people. Very often they had different shurim that were more desired or less desired, and sometimes they would attract people by saying, oh, you can go to a second year shir or a third year shir. And it wasn't necessarily the best situation. I was fortunate, not fortunate, I was in the freshman shir, and I had this person named Rabbi Lichtenstein. And Rabbi Lichtenstein was known for his greatness, but at the same time, again, I'll describe as a scared freshman in college some of the things that took place. First thing, he walks in, he lets you know, everybody should buy a Shas and a Rambam. That's when the first full-volume Shas was coming out. You get a Shas and a Rambam, and you use it. What would you use it for? We didn't realize that there's base medrash for hours. He would give Mari Mikomos. My previous yeshiva never did that. Listen them down. You do them. You come. Machmid, and he always said, when you have sources, do the side sources. If there's a Gemara that quotes another Gemara from a different place, look that up too. Again, never fearfully, but because that's the way you learn. By learning different things from different places, your learning grows. He wanted us to buy the Rambam and Shas. I remember it cost $25 for both. And I remember not wanting to get it because that's expensive. I remember Rav Aharon pointing out that you're in college, you'll take a chemistry course, and you'll have to buy the book written by the professor. And the book will cost $35. You'll use it for one term or a second term if you're successful. That's it, you'll never use it again. This Shas you'll have forever. So I still have the Shas and the Rambam. I'm figuring out financially. It's cost maybe 50 cents a year for both. So it paid off. But I remember saying that's really a good idea. It was a type of shas that was just new, so the binding broke right away. Unlike the ones they have new and improved. But the situation was, that's what you got. You had this and you had that. And Rabbi would give Mari Makomos. He'd be makbid, as I said. And then you'd be in Beis Medrash Chavrusa learning. And then you'd have the scared situation. You'd be in the shir. And it was an interactive shir. I think as time went on, it was less, but there was still. And he had everybody involved. And your heart is in your mouth. My heart was in my mouth. That I wouldn't be called on. And there were times that I was. And there were times that my mind went blank, even though I knew the material. But I remember, I said, like, Rav Aharon is Mount Everest. He has such a high command of everything. And I remember the scared situation, but it was an internalized scared situation. It wasn't because of him. That's an important thing that I'm going to point out now and a little bit later on, in later years as well. He was intimidating, but I think it was self-intimidating. Because you look at him and you see how great he was, and you say, how can I relate? How can I this? How can I that? And it really, even then, wasn't that way. Well, if you weren't prepared, or you didn't know it, he didn't browbeat you, he didn't anything. He might have gone to the other person, might have asked you a little bit. In my case, he might have just given up and stopped calling on me. But the situation was, it was a situation that you were nervous, and you want to make sure you're prepared for everything. And that was the situation. That was the feeling I had at the time. Not on a personal level. On a personal level, he was always available to talk. You had to get the courage to want to talk to him. He was available to talk about almost anything you wanted to talk about. It wasn't only Torah. First, you only see him through Torah eyes. That's the way you should see him. I mean, he lived through Torah eyes. He lived a Torah way, but his whole mahut was Torah. And you could see that. So then I didn't see it as much. I mean, I saw it, but I couldn't necessarily relate to it. I know that he had the top reputation. His wife said that at the time, he wanted the younger shiurim. She said, the other Rosh Yeshiva, it's a similar type of thing of the students getting entranced by second year, third year, fourth year shir. Sometimes that happened with some of the Rebbeim too. He wanted the younger ones because he felt, number one, they had the greatest potential and he could impact on them the most. She told me that today. And the great surprise that they had when Rav Aharon passed away was the outpouring. They were still shocked at the impact he had, let's say, on Klal Yisrael, on the Gush, on American Torah, and all sorts of different things. Memories I have there, okay, visual memories. He never walked. I don't think he raced. He didn't sprint. But he always walked quickly in a rush to get to somewhere with his Gemara and his Rambam, 4-volume. And not only, I think that he had many, like he'd have a pile of Gemaras and a pile of other Mefarshim, running to Shir, running here, running there, always busy. Not always business. I mean, he seemed like there was always business in Torah. But he wasn't always business in Torah. He was available. And that's an important factor. We were amazed that he could give a shir, whatever he's doing, and somebody raises a question, somebody asks a question, something like that, and he would just, reach out and pick up whatever sefer he thought the answer was in, throw it 3 pages, and he was on the daf. In other words, he knew he had the command that he could see. He had the command of everything he had. This is me watching. And I said, this is never going to be for me. I'll never be able to do something like that. But he could do it. It was a worthwhile thing just to see. And it was done very, very good, modestly. He did not go, he didn't tout everything he had. He learned. But he also communicated. Every Sunday there was called a hashkafa shir. What Sunday? Every Sunday there was a hashkafa shir. But he would pick a topic. It wasn't necessarily the question and answers that is developed here, like the Q&A or whatever it is. At the time, he picked topics that he felt passionate about, and he spoke about it. And it made a difference. Things that he did and talked about stayed with me. He talked about the importance of people going into chinuch. Talked about the importance of passing on that which you learn and live, but you have to share it with others. I'm not going to use the, hearing the crying baby. That was later on, but at the time, it was hear the crying university students. Hear all the various people you're hearing and do something with them. And dedicate your life, number one. Number two, strive for excellence. Whatever you're doing, if you can be doing more, you should be doing more. Don't be a slacker. Talked about that. He talked about making use of your time. And that impacted him. And I think that I went into chinuch. It took me a while, but I went into chinuch in great part because of his hashpa'ah. Don't speak about it. Again, not browbeating, not attacking. I know there were different people who went and spoke about different things, and that was the same thing that they came with. So that was then. The character development that he talked about. It wasn't only chinuch. It was how to be a person. What kind of person? Honesty, integrity, ethics. He would deal with current events. He would deal with certain things. And dealing with it, he would express his opinion, have a lot of sources, had a lot of different things from all over, whether it was his love for English literature and people from there, and people from history and around, all sorts of different people. And it made a big difference. It made a difference in my life at the time. Something that I remember again as well, that was the year of the 6-Day War, when I was in Shir. And I didn't appreciate it then as much as I appreciated it later on. I'll get to that in a minute or two. 6-Day War broke out. It's not like now that you know what's happening before it happens. Then you didn't know. There was a blackout. There was a news blackout. The Arab stations were talking about how Jerusalem was destroyed and the Haifa port was burning and all the different things. We didn't know. I remember I come to school one morning, I think must have been the day that it broke out, and Rav Aharon led something that sticks with me for probably the most meaningful tefillah day that I could remember. We had a shiur, we got together, and for about 3 hours, we said Tehillim, with him leading it. Now, to hear Rav Aharon daven was inspiring. Just the way he did it. I'm not the mimic or anything like that, but it was a intense, heartfelt type of tefillah. And it was 3 hours. And I remember it. I remember at the time we weren't sure. The situation was dire. We thought everything was just a matter of time. I had relatives in Israel. I said, they're all finished, because that's what the press was saying. Miraculously, I don't have to describe the history, the euphoria. And I think that in part started him on his trajectory to think about moving there to Israel. It took a few years, but I think that was the impetus. I think he talked about it, about the difference about being, I guess, in the stands or on the 50-yard line in a football field. He said, you live there, you're in a 50-yard line of history. And he went. And why he was not happy? He had a life and a future. He was up and coming and already a star there. But he made that decision with the family. I think it was great personal sacrifice at the time, but it was inspiration. So he's going, Rosh Kollel, he was the Rosh Kollel, he was the Rebbe of the Shir. He went and how did he choose? You think about that too. He chose this little yeshiva on the hill in a trif. Okay? He was offered a number of different things. I'm not giving you the history they don't know about, but he chose to come here. And when you speak to him, I used to speak to him. Later on, I used to speak to him a lot more. I got over my, not my scaredness, but my not seeing what I should have seen all the years, even when I was younger, but to be explained. He said he picked here, I think because of his meeting with Rav Amitam. Examples of the humility that he had, and that's a very important factor as well. Humility doesn't mean you say you're nothing. You recognize your strengths, you recognize them as being from Hashem, and you utilize them to the best of your ability. That applies to everybody here too. People have strengths, utilize them, and work hard. And demand from yourself. And then you can demand from others as well. Whether it's chinuch or whatever it's going to be, you be involved in the community. He met Rabbi Mital. Rabbi Mital was ready to give him all the keys. The original letter Rabbi Mital apparently wrote. I heard this from Rabbi Mital's son, and Rabbi Mital's Shiva, and I heard from Rabbi, he was offered the position of being the Rosh Yeshiva of Gush. So the son said, Ad Kadei Kach, the Rabbi Mital's son, Rabbi Yoel asked Rabbi Mital, he said, okay, Zemashat Shrichim. Rabbi Aharon came. I guess he was impressed. He saw potential. And he agreed to come on one condition. And that condition was, once he found out that Rabbi Mital was a Rosh Yeshiva, when he first got the letter, he said he thought it was signed by Mr. Amital. He thought it was some pakid in the yeshiva and stuff. When he found out, he said, I'll only take it if Amital continues to be the Rosh Yeshiva. It doesn't know you, whatever. The situation was that they could be 40, 45 years together. And the only question you had is, who was more respectful to the other? Who gave more kavod to the other? They each brought different things there. Okay? Rav Aharon wasn't necessarily charismatic in the way he spoke. There are people who can speak beautifully, charismatically. I like, but it's not. But there are people who can really do that. He didn't do that. He spoke emes. He spoke passionately. And you could see the sincerity. You could see how much it meant to him. And therefore, it was very hard not to be moved by that. Okay? At the same time, again, he didn't lecture necessarily. They had you think about it. Years later, so again, he went to Eretz Yisrael. Family went. He chose Gush. There's stories about that too, but that's not the issue for right now. I made Aliyah, also possibly as it took longer. I was doing some teaching in Chinuch, following Rabbi's suggestion in America. And then the point came to, you can do Chinuch in America all your life and still justify it. And I didn't want to necessarily do that. I wanted to see maybe I could do some Chinuch in Israel as well. Made Aliyah. I was here, we kept in touch. And then the opportunity came for him to ask if I would come and work and learn in the yeshiva. And for me, I decided I would give it a try because I'm coming back to my Rebbe. There was a different situation. No longer scared. The guys here were scared. The Talmidim were scared. The Rabbim who had been his Talmidim were nervous. I was less nervous, so I said, I'm not going to wow him with my Torah, but I'll be able to utilize the things that he's taught and ask him about on a personal level and a personal decision. And that's what I did when I came to the yeshiva. I was zocher to be close with Rav Aharon. For me, it was a schus. Nothing was off the table. He'd be available for all sorts of conversations, Torah conversations, personal conversations, life conversations. He was available for everybody. People didn't necessarily know or to take advantage of it because maybe they were scared. People told me, how can I go? I used to send Talmidim. After Rav Aharon knew that I was bothering him, we introduced the Sichot Rosh Yeshiva. When I came then, Rav Vital gave it one week and Rav Lichtenstein gave it the other week. And then there'd be some questions and answers. Rav Vital did it from 12:30 to 1. And he'd give something, and then he'd answer about 10, 12 questions. Rav Aharon would do it after Mincha for much longer. He would answer fewer questions because his breadth and knowledge would be something. You'd ask him something from anywhere, and he'd go on and give all the sides and all the things. He had you think about all the different possibilities, and that took long. But it also caused people to think, I can't ask him. He's busy. I have my questions. So I used to encourage them. I used to tell them, go and speak with Rav Aharon. Guy would leave. I said, you never spoke to Rav Aharon. I said, say goodbye. He said, I didn't say hello. I said, so what? Go. That's what I said. He says, Rav Aharon can't do it. Rav Aharon would come. This is what I learned. The Hasmadim would point out 2 or 3 more things. I said that I wasn't going to speak that long, so I'm going to try to cut it down. Apologize. A little bit emotional, just in terms of the connection, just to see him. He'd walk in the morning. He'd sit down. 1:10, he'd get up. No, unless there was something. If there were meetings, he'd get up. If people came to him in the basement, if he was giving a shir, he'd say, don't come now, come back. But he was always available to talk to people. If a person came to say goodbye, and he wasn't preparing a shir, he'd have him sit down. He'd talk about his future. He'd talk about all different things that the guy would be interested in or want to know about. Rav Lichtenstein showed a tremendous interest, and guys were very grateful at the time that we pushed him to go. He was available. I learned hasmada. Just the fact that you can just sit there and do it. He never went to lunch before 1:10. I think it was a statement. Okay? Zaman doesn't, I mean, the morning Seder ends at 1, or it doesn't. You can come a little bit later and go there too. He'd come and eat as quickly as he can. Remember, at different times, he'd come, and some of the Rebbeim were sitting there, would finish their meals quicker. I guess they were still a little nervous. And I would see my eyes would light up, and maybe he would get a little nervous. So I'd be able to just sit there and talk with him and ask him things and be available. And it was just a wonderful experience. So the situation is, what memories do I have, and what did it do? So a few things. Just one, love of learning, situation of hasmada, be available to other people, do it b'sever panim yafos, show empathy. When you speak to him, he was really taken in by the things you were talking about, and would give you whatever guidance he felt he would do. He wouldn't tell you what to do in most cases. He would give you the parameters, and you had a chance to think about what situations apply to you. Then, years later, I used to watch him during tefillah. It was intense. It was like that intense 1967 when I didn't appreciate it. And here for a regular tefillah, it was heartfelt. It was really just something to watch on a regular basis. Watching him saying Tehillim for somebody. Watching him dance at a chasana with his full heart, the same full heart. Watching him dance Simchas Torah with just hit lahavut. He would have, the hakafas would go along, and he would hold the Sefer Torah from beginning to end, even as he got older. As he got older, toward the last years, I think they gave him the smaller Sefer Torah. But beside that, just the hit lahavut, the way he would do it, you see pictures sometimes with him, his hand up and stuff. It was just an inspiring thing, and it perpetuated the love that he felt and the love that we can have as well. His modesty was unbelievable. I said before, he knew what he was. He knew who he was. He took that and used it and encouraged other people to do that as well. He was involved in so many things in tziyunut, so many things in terms of public, whatever there was, and he still had time to be in the Beis Medrash all the time. When he couldn't, he didn't. But nobody knows. I mean, I remember hearing how many people used to come. His house was the hot spot in terms of people coming to collect tzedakah, for example. There were people who would come there and ask for guidance, and he was always available. Just important. Torah-driven, ahavas Torah-driven. The ethical demands of life are important for everybody here. And we should be zocha to at least have some sort of picture through this.
Since I don't yet know exactly what I'm going to say, I'm going to stall for a few minutes while I think about it. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. It's Rabbi Weber's fault, who only asked me this morning. Rabbi Aharon had a custom. He had a minhag. Sometimes it was annoying, where if somebody spoke about personal stories that he knew about, or that he was involved in, then the first thing he would do when he got up is he would correct the stories. Like, and he really had a baby memory. I mean, it was one time, I think it was his 70th birthday, and they did a thing in yeshiva, and Tavori Zatzal, who was the person who had the earliest memories of Rabbi Aharon, because he knew him as a little boy a little bit. And so he told something about Rabbi Aharon, which he had heard from Rabbi Aharon's father when he was 11 years old. And Rabbi Aharon said, no, it wasn't Mishnayos, it was Tanakh. Right? And he had this custom. So I'm not correcting anything that Rabbi Rhein said, but something I just want to correct a misapprehension, because you might think that it was universal. It is true that Rhein told every Talmud to have a Shas and a Rambam, which you can't learn without a Shas and a Rambam next to you, which, by the way, isn't only revolutionary to high school students, which we will when we end this year. And obviously in high school, you don't have to just do what the Rebbe says. But it's not true in yeshivas. Any yeshiva, almost all Haredi yeshivas, and any old yeshiva, they learn on a shtender. You can't have a Shas and a Rambam. There's no room for it. The myth, which in this case apparently is true, in this yeshiva is when they built the yeshiva, there was a machlokas between Rabbi Mital and Rabbi Lichtenstein on the furniture. Rabbi Mital wanted shtenders, like the yeshiva is supposed to look, and Rabbi Lichtenstein said we should have tables. And in the end they made a pshara, they had both tables and shtenders. The truth is, they had like 50 tables and 7 shtenders. That was the pshara. The shtenders have disappeared a long time ago, but they were originally in the back of the base medrash. And the explanation of the machlokas was that Rabbi Mital, he lived with the Gemara. But Rabbi said, how can you live with the Gemara? There's no room. My point is the following. He told everybody to do it, and it really was very cheap. It was $25 over 50 years. It's 50 cents a year, and that's why Rabbi Rhein did it. I'm just cheaper than this. I didn't do it. To this day, I do not own a 4-volume Shas. The answer is simple. My Chavusa had a 4-volume Shas. There's no need for 2. But okay, that's the difference between us. It has nothing to do with religion. There is a point I want to make. I'm going to put it up a little bit just to explain, in a way to be parallel, Rabbi Rhein's account, but from my own point of view. Rhein gave a first-year shiur in yeshiva, freshman shiur as they called it. And I stayed 2 years. I stayed 2 years. A lot of us stayed 2 years. It was the first time that was ever done. And why you kept moving up, but here we didn't want to go anyplace else, so we arranged to stay 2 years in the same shiur. Well, I entered the shiur when I was in high school, because I went to MTS. And there was a program with you in your last year of high school, you get into a college shiur. So I was in Rhein shiur when I was a senior in high school, and my first year in college. Aside from that, I was young. So I met Rhein when I was 15. It was when I entered the shiur. It was a bit too young. And it wasn't just that it was different than high school. It was the first time that, I had good Rebbeim in high school, but it was the first time that, this is not a criticism of anybody else, it was the first time you met somebody, I met somebody who, like, he represented Torah, it was part of the Masorah of Torah going back to Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, why is it revolutionary? Because that's not so extraordinary. I'm speaking now in terms of 50 years ago. I don't know how it will be exactly today, but I think it's sort of similar. I knew people who could do that, but they were, in those days, in the 60s, there were people with long beards who spoke Yiddish. So it wasn't the Chiddush, they belonged to the Masorah because they looked like their Rebbes had looked like their Rebbes had looked. So I had a grandfather who was a big Talmid Chacham, one of the Gedolei Yisrael. You knew that there were people like that. And the question is, what does that really mean for you when you meet it? Because we weren't. We were Americans. I was more American than Rabbi Rhein. Rabbi Rhein went to a real yeshiva high school, which he explained had a lot of to my chacham. I went to MTA. I can see this in MTA voice. But Rabbi was just a regular guy. Didn't have a beard. Spoke English. We played basketball with him. I can't count how many basketball games I played with him. I can't even count how many times he elbowed me in basketball. Oh, it's an important point. I'll explain later why it's an important point. There was a thought to tell you that. We had a machlokas. We played ball with him. 3-on-3. Who would take him? Who would defend against him? The other boys I was with, we used to refuse because it was kind of usher. You couldn't go in close enough. I decided, see what a big Talmid Chacham I was at the age of 15, that if a man plays basketball with you and elbows you illegally, then he's mocha that you can elbow him back. And therefore I used to volunteer to take him. But we exchanged blows more than once. I didn't give him as much as he gave me, but Chosat would have caught a Torah, but yeah, I thought it was fun. And I think that was an amazing experience for a 15-year-old. I met somebody who, without any of the external factors. No beard. That's I don't know. I think it's probably still true. But no beard is it's an amazing thing. He was just a guy. He wasn't old enough to grow a beard yet, and he spoke English, which none of the other Rabbeim in the yeshiva could. Spoke English without an accent. Most of them couldn't speak English at all. The shiur, most of the shiur was still in Yiddish when he came. All the shiur in Yiddish. Well, one or two didn't give shiur in Yiddish. The Rabbi started giving it English. It's true. Rabbi Soloveitchik gave shiur in English also. At the Baron Soloveitchik's Levaya, not Levaya, the husband in yeshiva. Rabbi was in Israel, but the husband in yeshiva. So Lichtenstein said the following. He met Rabbi Aharon when he was in high school. Rabbi Aharon was a Ram in Rhein, Berlin. And that's where Lichtenstein met Rabbi Soloveitchik. And then he met the Rabbi later on. So he said the following. I'm going to quote it as well as I remember all the words. He said, when he met the Rabbi later on, it was amazing, but he never thought he would be like the Rav. When he met Rav Aharon, he thought, and then he immediately added, by mistake, it was a ta'ut, but he thought when he met Rav Aharon... It was
vainglorious.
What?
It was vainglorious.
I don't remember the word vainglorious. Maybe I didn't know what it meant. He said, he thought mistakenly that he could be like Rav Aharon. Later on he realized that it wasn't true. Different reasons. I don't think he's right. I think it was true, but he thought it wasn't true. So I'm going to say the same thing now. In other words, I spent 6 years learning by the Rabbi, and it definitely formed a lot of my understandings of Yiddishkeit. It definitely completely formed the way I learned. But I never imagined I could be like the Rabbi. When we met Rav Aharon, so we thought. Mistakenly, what was that word? Vaingloriously, I thought I could be like Rav Aharon. And there was a point where, when I was at that age, I was still in Rav Aharon's shir, 60 years, like 55 years ago. My mother accused me, apparently correctly, of literally imitating Rav Aharon, talking in the cadence of his voice, which I stopped doing, but apparently she was right. And the reason was because I really wanted to be like Rav Aharon, which would not have happened if a person on the same level of godless, but in the old style and coming from a different world, you would not have identified. So that was really an important factor in terms of us as Talmidim then. And I have a story to tell, which I know Rabbi Rhein wants me to tell, so I'll tell it. And first year I was in the year. Again, it's important because I was 15 years old. It's very. Things make an impression on you then, which maybe wouldn't make an impression if I had been 33. And the Tziv, you don't have to put your masks on. That's innocent cough. It's not my pocket coughs. Twice, maybe it's important. It's my wife. When Tziv says about Yitzhak and Rivka, when Rivka met Yitzhak, she fell off the camel. It says, "Vatipol me'al gamal." So Rashi says that tipol means that she descended, not that she fell. Well, why would she fall off a gamal? She knew how to ride a gamal. She was experienced. Vatipol also means yelda. But the Tziv explains it the way we think it means, that the tipol means she fell off. And the Tziv has this whole thing there that she also was very young. And she met Yitzhak when he was coming back from Be'er L'Chai. He had gone there for his bodedut. He was a shtickle Betzleva. He had been talking to Kadosh Baruch Hu. When he came back and she saw him, Atuf Be'ananei HaKavod, and she was just overwhelmed by his kedusha, and that's why she just fell off the camel. And therefore, for the rest of her life, she was unable to approach Yitzchak as an equal, to tell him in his face what had to be told. Not that she was so afraid of him that she wouldn't manipulate him behind his back like she did with Yaakov. But she could have just gone to Yitzhak and said, Yaakov's a tzaddik and Esav's a bum. She couldn't do that. Because of this, that was their relationship. And his point was that your first meeting really affects you. So that is true. It's interesting that Rabbi Rhein said that when he came back to Israel, he just used to go talk to Luch and say he wasn't afraid of him anymore. I think when Rhein died, before the Levaya, I think it was, I was in the house, and the Rebbitzin Tova said to me, I'd actually gone to the house when his body was still in the house, and she said to me that she remembers that when her father, the Rav, died, and I gave a short, not really a hesped, I learned Mishnayos, I gave a little introduction to the Mishnayos in Yeshiva, and I had said then that only after the Rav died did I realize that I loved the Rav. That when the Rav died, it had been 15 years since I had spoken to him or seen him, living in Ezra. And I have to admit the truth, I didn't think about the Rav during those 15 years. Occasionally I would ask about him, how he felt, whatever I was doing, but it wasn't in my head. And but when the Rav died, I cried. And I realized that I had loved the Rav, but I didn't realize B'chaya because we were so afraid of him. But now, I always knew that I loved Lichtenstein. So a few years later, she said to me, then at the moment she said to me, you said about my father that, you feared him, but I know that you really loved that you loved my husband. She replied that I didn't fear him. So I told her the truth. To that day, before I spoke to Rav Aharon, I would go, okay, I have to get ready. I have to say what I'm going to say. I did not go over maybe the last 2 years, but surely not for the years before that. I think one of the reasons is because I was 15 and he was 18 when we met the Rav, and it made a difference. It was always remained. But I want to talk about the point that Rabbi Rhein made. It was a very different kind of awe than you might expect. When I met the Rav he wasn't at his height of his awness at the time. He had mellowed, they say. The stories about the Rav in the 50s were that people didn't eat before Shir because their stomachs would get upset. And I met the Rav. We used to eat. But I never spoke to the Rav. It took me 6 months to speak to the Rav. It's also a story about Rav Aharon. After 6 months in the Rav Shir, we used to hang out after Shir, and people would ask some questions. I would go to listen. One time I had a really good question. And it took me 6 months. I said, okay, I'm going to ask this question. I asked the question, and I probably didn't speak clearly. In any event, the Rav didn't always hear clearly because he was moving so fast. He said, what did you say? And Rav Aharon was there, and he said, what Ezra wanted to ask, I'm pretty sure he made the question much better. What Ezra wanted to ask was the following. So that's also the story about Rav Aharon. He was a very nice man. And two, you couldn't talk to the Rav. It really was amazing. But the truth was I couldn't talk to Rav Aharon either. I used to very much more, but very carefully for years. I'm saying for 40 years afterwards. But what did the awe come from? The awe from the Rav came because the Rav was literally a volcano. His eyes burned through you. When the Rav looked at you, you melted. Rav, as I said, he didn't have a beard. His eyes didn't burn. He didn't turn to you when you asked a question. He thought it was a stupid question. He turned to you and say, "What did you say? That's ridiculous." He would say, "Interesting. Let's could be different." He was a nice man. There was no reason to be afraid of him. So why were we all in awe of the Rav? And even Rabbi Rhein was in awe of the Rav for the first 20 years at least, 20, 30. Still. It definitely wasn't because of externals. And it was a different kind of, even an internal. It wasn't a burning fire. It was just the midos. And now I get to the real point, which is why was he so important? Truth was, I was amazed at the Levaya. How many people came to the Levaya? 10,000 people came to the Levaya. Now, I've known about for a long time. To be close to Rav Aharon in not what you think in your heart, but because Rav Aharon, it wasn't that popular. Basically the Lamdanim, or you had something to talk to him about. But even in Shir, at those days, we had a Shir of 35 people. I don't know if the majority of the Shir afterwards considered themselves to be Talmidim of Rav Aharon, because you had to get into, the kind of learning, etc. So I was amazed that 10,000 people showed up. And a lot of them were not Lamdanim, and many of them didn't even learn in Yeshiva. Many of those people did not learn in Yeshiva. I'll tell you, in a personal thing, my own family, we lived in a lunchboard, so he didn't live in a lunchboard, we lived in a lunchboard. I was close up to Aharon to invite him to their bar mitzvahs, okay? But, and they saw on Shabbos. Every one of my children came to the Levaya. One learned in yeshiva, one did not learn in yeshiva, and the 3 girls came. None of them learned in yeshiva. And I would say that, as far as I remember, none of them ever spoke to him. They probably did, because he used to go over there to talk to them, but they weren't Talmidim of Aharon. They all ran to come to the back. They came from far away. They all came. And I asked myself that. I was very happy. I said, why? Why are they coming? Why was Aharon a leader? He was a leader to so many people. And it wasn't because of the chidushim and the Torah here or the chidushim there. was because of the example. This is the thing where the awe comes from. He was an amazing example of how we should live. For years, I used to think, when I read the pasuk, once a year you read the pasuk, Ruach Apenu Mashiach Hashem Nokat B'Shchitotam Asher Amarnu B'Tzilo Nechia B'Goyim. And I used to think about it when I read that pasuk. And because of the end, Asher Amarnu B'Tzilo Nechia B'Goyim. He was an example, an extreme example of how we can live normally. The word normaliyut in Hebrew is a sisma yeshivat Harav, because Amital talked about it a lot. Amital used to talk about all kinds of dolim, but they're all crazy dolim. But normally, to learn all the time, to be excited, but to be normally, to be normal. So Aharon wasn't normal the way Amital meant it, but he was normal in a different sense. Rabbi was normal in an abnormal manner, and with vengeance, with conviction. Everything he did, which was more or less resembled the normal American life. Other than the fact that he learned all day long, but he also played basketball, and he. I can tell. I have to fill in for other people. There's a Tavoris, that's our story that he told about with Lichtenstein. Tavoris had a funny sense of humor. Somebody once came to visit yeshiva with a little kid, a 10-year-old. He was speaking to Tavoris, and then Tavoris said to me, "See that man over there?" Pointed to Rhein, he said to the 10-year-old kid, "He knows the MVP of the American League and the National League going back 50 years by heart." So the kid said, "Nah, can't be." He said, "Go ask him." So it could never be. So the kid wasn't afraid. The kid went home and said to him, "Who was the American League MVP in 1943? Ellie, what's the answer? Rabbi, what's the answer? What? Somebody knows the answer? Wow, you're just like Aharon. Yes! On the spot, gave him the answer. But he was normal with a vengeance. In other words, everything was because he thought it was the right thing. He told us how we could be modern or normal or balanced, but the fact is we have to admit the truth. Most of what goes as modern Orthodox Jewry is a valiant attempt to balance mitoch pshara. In other words, we want also to play basketball. We want also to read the New York Times. We want also to go to the theater. We want also to go to the movies. We also want to be good with God. And so you work it out, and then, okay, you're a little bit this, a little bit of that, with a big feeling in your heart, I hope, if you're serious, that you're not really learning enough because you go too often to the movies, and maybe you're not being educated enough because you don't read enough books. But with Aharon, maybe even there's no nafka mina. It could be it would be the same percentages, although usually it isn't. But it was all because he was committed to it, not because he was doing the show. And that was something which I think for most, that's what in the end, for those who just met him, very often didn't learn, they just met him and saw it, or they read a little bit, became the reason why he was the leader, why he became a leader. I was always amazed when he became a leader, because I came on Aliyah a few years after he did, and yeshiva, he was the leader of the yeshiva, that was both, he was Rosh Yeshiva. And years later, I discovered that he was flying back to America every year because they it's also saying something about the American rabbinate, but nonetheless, they needed him there to not to answer shaylas lahalacha, but to answer shaylas how to live. He used to go to every RCA convention. They invited him, they paid for him to come, they sent him a ticket, because they needed someone who would exemplify and explain. Also, he used to talk, he would explain, but also just by being there, he would exemplify what modern Orthodox American Judaism should be. And they didn't feel they could rely on other examples. I think that's what really, I think at 15 I sensed, it doesn't make sense, but I think, it was, I didn't want to be that from a Jew when I was 15. I graduated high school. He changed me very, very quickly. But very, very quickly, I wanted to be just like that. At the time I thought I would succeed 100%, but I wanted to be just like that because it was how to be a Jew in the modern world. B'tzilo, nichyeh, expression, pasuk is bagoyim, in this world, I'm retranslating it. By being an example. How did I get to be a Talmud of Lichtenstein, really? That's another area as well. Rhein talked about his alumnus. It's interesting. It's true. You could ask him a question, and he would, take out the Gemara and say, there's a Gemara, there's a Gemara, there's a Gemara. He really knew everything. He had an annoying habit about it too. I once asked him a shayla. I thought it was a good shayla, la halacha. And he said, it's the Tosas Menachas. If he said it's Tosas Babakam, I wouldn't have known what he meant. But he says it's a Tosas Menachas. That's all he said. And I never figured out if he's doing it on purpose or not. To this day, I don't know. Is he doing it to tell me that you really should know what I'm talking about, or whether he really thought Tosas Menachas? Everybody knows it. Once he says it, I'll figure it out. So a few years earlier, I would have said there were times where I used to go and I would go back. I'd go to Rav Tavoy and say, what did he mean Tosas Menachas? We'd work it out. This particular case that I remember, I was already getting a little bit better. So I said to him, which Tosas Menachas? And he opened it up, he showed me Tosas Menachas, and okay, it was indeed was relevant. But the truth was, at the time, when I was 15, I wasn't that awed by that. So I thought all Talmidei Chachamim do Shas B'Alpeh. I think Rabbi Rhein went to yeshiva in high school with a lot of big Talmidei Chachamim, and they didn't know Shas B'Alpeh. But I went to MTA. I didn't think there was such big Talmidei Chachamim. A real Talmid Chacham was giving a shir in yeshiva Gvor. Of course, you know Shas B'Alpeh. That didn't impress me then. So that wasn't really what bowled me over. I think what bowled me over, totally different area altogether. 1965. That's when I entered the shir. 1965. It's before the 6 Day War. After the 6 Day War, Russian Jewry exploded. The 6 Day War affected Jews in Russia. Before the 6 Day War, there was one or two individuals who were trying to find their way to Judaism within Russia, within the amazing oppression and darkness that was Russian Jewry. Elie Wiesel went to Russia on a visit in 1965, and he looked for Jews. He wrote a book called The Jews Are Silent. It's Elie Wieselish, so we're not sure if the stories are true or not. He always insists that all the stories are true. Not everybody believes it. He has a lot of good stories. An excerpt from the book, before it was published, the book came out a little bit later, but before it was published, an excerpt appeared in a magazine called Life, which was an American magazine, big glassy magazine, big pictures, about things. It's very popular. There were two magazines, Life and Look. An excerpt came out from Life. Describes a story that he was in some smaller town someplace, not in Moscow, and there was one old Jew there who had a sukkah, an old man with a beard, and a couple of Jews came with them, and Elie Wiesel was there, and the Jew gave a little drasha at the sukkah. They ate a little bit, and he said, this is the end of Judaism. This is the last sukkah that anyone's ever going to see, because after us, it's all gone. That's what I remember from the story. He came into shir, and Lichtenstein said, after he gave shir half the time, an hour instead of 2 hours, he said, now he wants to read this to us. Now, you understand, if he's reading it to us, it's because he read it previously. If you know of Lichtenstein, he read it twice previously to make sure that he could get everything important. And he got up and he started reading it, and in the middle, he choked up and could not continue. When he got to more or less the point I just described about the man describing how the Jewish guy was over. And we sat there for a few minutes, and it wasn't going anywhere. I just got up and walked out. And to the best of my memory, I don't think I'm making this up, that's when I became a Talmud of Lichtenstein. The learning was really important. There's no question about it. It changed my life. I learned that you have to learn, that you have to be dedicated to it. You can make the Torah into the center of your life, not just an interesting thing you do between one course and another. But the personal aspect of it was these, I think, really unique, truly unique. I've known a lot of Gdolim. Truly unique connection between the normal godless Torah to a very high degree, and the incredible moral and personal sensitivity, because it's a combination of both. There's moral sensitivity to what's right and what's wrong, but the personal sensitivity to cry over something that he had already read. In other words, he wasn't being overwhelmed. He was being overwhelmed, but he was overwhelmed again, because it was just as sad the third time as it was the first time, and therefore he could do it again. In a somewhat more exaggerated version of the same thing, he once said to us, I think it was that year, I don't know how it came up, it was before Yom Kippur, he came up with this line. He said, he's jealous of us because we can read. He happened to have liked the book Paradise Lost. So I think it was Yom Kippur because it's connected by Milton. He loved John Milton. He said he's very jealous of us because we can read John Milton, we can read Paradise Lost for the first or second time. When you've read it 17 times, it's less influential. So I realized the man was only 34 at the time. He apparently read it once a year before Yom Kippur. That's when I realized that. And the truth was, he said it was less emotional to read the 17th time, but it's the first, 5th or 6th time, he was still being overwhelmed by the sensitivity to what was going around. And that leads to another point, which I think also affects many of the Talmidim and the pseudo-Talmidim. Talmidim who weren't Talmidim in Shir, but feel that he led them, as I mentioned. I think one of the reasons I started to say so I didn't finish it. My children later on told me they came to the Rabbi. Not about the girls, not about the boys. Came to the Rabbi because he was the Rav of the family. Now, Rav of the family, he didn't pass the Shabbos for my family. I could think of 3 or 4 times I asked him a Shayla Halacha and I wanted to hear what he had to say. I wasn't that type. I passed the Shabbos for the family. I looked it up. But they meant, and I'm saying these are girls. He was the leader. He was the more. And it just was like, it wasn't because of anything specific. It was like automatic. One of the main reasons is, I just thought of this recently. I feel it's because I do it. I don't know if other people do it. I may be transferring. How many times in my life do I say to myself, what would Rav Aharon have done in this situation? And what would he have said about this? People ask me questions. If I answer quickly, I answer what I think. If I have time, I know what I'm doing. I say to myself, what would Rav Aharon's article on this topic look like? And then I try closer to appropriate to change it, because what I really believe. And it's even more true, not so much in ideas, as simply in actions. Rav Aharon is a much more ethical person than I am. But as ethical as I am, many of the cases is, I stop myself at the last second and say, he would have done it differently. It's ethical sensitivity, but I can't even explain it. It's a dmut that was appropriate for all kinds of reasons, because he didn't have a beard, because he was close to us, and because he was great, that if the best thing I could do would be to do the same thing he did. And that carries for the 40 years in yeshivat Ha'etzion. So I don't remember the stories. I don't have that many stories. And maybe there weren't that many stories. You give a hesped to somebody, so Gedom, you give a hesped by telling stories that did miracles, like the Chassidish Rebbeim. Or you can give amazing godless stories in Torah. When he was 6 years old, they asked him a kasha, and he answered the Rav Kibbeh kasha. I don't know any stories like that about Rav Aharon. There probably are, but I don't know any. The godless here is different. I'm not going to quote something he said in this Medrash, but I think everybody in this Medrash, somehow you seeped in this leadership. It molded what it meant to have learned to even for a couple of days. It molded that you now would live your life in a certain kind of Yiddishkeit, which is not a balance between, not what we think modern Orthodoxy is, a balance between A, B, and C, but Avodas Hashem, total Avodas Hashem, but with a certain gisha that says you have to be over Hashem this way and this way and this way, put it all together and balance it. One nafkaminus. There's a difference between playing a little bit of basketball and learning a little bit of Torah. 2, playing the right amount of basketball, because Rhein had a whole theory why it's important to play basketball. You should know this. This is important and this is important. There might be nafkamina, how many minutes, and maybe there's no nafkamina. I don't know what Rav Aharon's answer is to how many starim, excuse me for the word, of basketball you need a week. In my head, I think my own personal minute when I was in Ezra was once a week, but when I was a Talmud in the Rosh Year, we played every day after Shir. So it could be that you could have 3 star or 5 star a week. I hope not, but it could be. Maybe he would agree, but he would only agree because it was right, because it was the proper balance to make a better Oved Hashem. In the end, everything was Avodas Hashem. There weren't any stam moments. And without it, he probably said that. Without him saying it, we all knew it. And that was the tremendous influence I think it had on the cloud over the years and years and years and years. And I had more years than most people, except for 3 years between his aliyah and 4 years between his aliyah and my aliyah. So I spent 50 years seeing him almost every day. But I don't think that's really the fact. I think that if I know a boy who lived in yeshiva for 1 month. He came in before he went to the army. He had 1 month, came in the army. He considered himself to be one a Talmud yeshiva, 2 a Talmud Rav Aharon. He wasn't a Rav Aharon Jew, of course, he was a kid. But later on, he made sure to self-identify in that way. And that, I think, Rabbi Weber said in the beginning that you're all Talmid Rav Aharon because you're Talmid of Rav Aharon, which is true. But by that argument, you're all Talmidim of the Rambam. So, Chav Tevis, okay, we missed it. But therefore, on Chav Tevis, which is the Rambam's yahrzeit, we should talk about the Rambam. You also all Talmidim of Moshe Rabbeinu. Zayin Hadu, we should talk about Moshe Rabbeinu. Maybe we should. It's a good argument. But there's something more going on. There's something more going on. It isn't only that, Moshe Kibbutz Torah Sina was really Yeshua, and without any link that's missing will affect us all. And it's not just the Rav story about when you're learning, and so the Rabbi Matan comes into the room, and the Rav and the Rabbi come into the room. There is, I think, I don't know how much it will affect you, because the Chazal, years are gone by, but there's a certain attitude towards living Yiddishkeit in the modern world that is, on one hand, doesn't take anything for granted. You have to criticize and you have to evaluate everything. But on the other hand, is a positive way of finding all the positive things, utilizing them, fulfilling them. Sometimes people used to be amazed because people assumed, okay, Ravana is a modern Orthodox Jew. And then they discovered that he wasn't a modern Orthodox Jew. People were not that way. I remember an article once appeared in an Israeli newspaper that said, someone who's still vice, he's an important person. He must have talked to Ravana about something. He came back and he wrote an article saying, who you Haredi? He said very disappointedly because he's head of a Zionist yeshiva. And in some ways it's true. But what disappointed him was that he was a modern Orthodox Jew. He went to Rhein, he wanted a justification for everything he was doing. Because everything is mutter if you're a modern Orthodox Jew, as long as it's not within the Torah that's asur. But Ravana was the other way around. Everything is asur unless it contributes to Avodas Hashem. A lot of things, much more than in the past people thought, contribute to Avodas Hashem. But then you embrace them. Once you get a heter to play basketball, you embrace playing basketball. I keep going back to the basketball because of the elbow. I'll tell you about the elbow. And he probably didn't mean to throw the elbows. He was a very ethical person. He had a hook shot, which I once explained this to him. No, I didn't dare explain it to him. I explained it to somebody else in the family. It was a double hook shot because there were two hooks, one went this way, one went this way. So I used to take him. There's a famous story, so maybe you've heard it before, but I was there. We were playing 3-on-3. Somebody on his team, he stopped the game. And he said to him, "Can't play with you? You're a very unethical player." Why was he unethical? He didn't play defense. He only played offense. He chucked. He was a good offensive player. He was a Boger, same Shiva High School. Rabbi Rhein was a Boger. And in the east side, that's how they play basketball. He played basketball with a passion. He really did. Tova once told, he said, when little kids, and we had a normal life, not a normal life. Rabbi Bick always said the thing he was most proud of was raising a family. This yeshiva, the thing he was most proud of was that he raised a family. And he raised a family, not being the yeshiva Tova, doing all kinds of things. He used to play chess with the kids. He used to beat them. The Tova said, she said to him, she had an argument with him, she said, because you have to lose. You have to encourage the thing. And he said, how would that would be a terrible example. You have, if I'm playing chess, I'm going to beat them. And hopefully they'll learn to beat me, and if they'll get the best by it, so we'll talk about it, but you don't play chess half-heartedly. And numerous Talmidim who all kinds of other things, they went to university, became whatever, doctors, lawyers, etc., will say, and they did say, remember they said this during the period of the Shloshim, they said that they went to university and all the time was like this cloud behind their things. They were yeshiva bochum, so they wanted to goof off a little bit. But it's very easy. Once you learn yeshiva for 6-7 years, you can do university without even thinking. But there was this Rav Aharon behind them saying, if already you're leaving the yeshiva to go to be a doctor, you're going to be the best doctor in the world. You have to devote yourself to it as much as possible. Of course, you have to also learn 4 or 5 hours a day, but you have nothing, you can't not take it seriously. This I'm not a good Talmud of Bick. Now I have Talmidim who are in the university. So I don't say this explicitly because I hear his voice, but I really hope that they'll say, okay, we have to also learn yeshiva, so they'll find the ways to cut corners the way I found the ways to cut corners. But I can't say it out loud because And he's right over here. He's like saying to me, what are you going to tell them not to do all the work? They have homework. They have to look up things. You have to tell them to read the Cliff Notes, just to read the short version. You can't do that. Awesome. How much use of your eyes? That was like, it was a model which has applications and influence beyond any particular area. It's not just that you should learn seriously. It's not that you should do seriously. It's like we're in this world to be Oved Hashem, to be Metakein Olam B'Malchus Shakain. And everything you do there, as much as possible, when you get so tired you can't move, so you're out of sleep. But again, it doesn't mean the extreme as you think. In other words, I know Yeshiva Bachim sometimes ask the question, what's the heter to eat? I could be learning now. Because in traditional yeshivas, the only heter to eat is because otherwise you'll starve to death. Rav used to come to eat. And we used to schmooze during the meal. We used to eat slowly. He didn't eat quickly. They told a story once, which I guess it's true, although it surprised me that he never ate soup. Remember when they told us things? He never took soup in yeshiva because soup, besides you eat it slowly. That surprised me because he never took soup because it was a waste of time. But when we ate, he wasn't rushing to go, okay, 2,000 calories a day, come out, I'm going to go there. He had a svara, which wasn't a complicated svara. Why? You eat and you enjoy. You get a chance to talk to the other guys at the table. Who we sat together at the table and we could schmooze a little bit. Rabbi Rhein used to schmooze with them. I used to listen. And when I first went to Rhein, I was 15, in YU, there's a cafeteria. You go with your tray, you pull up your tray, you go sit down. So he used to go sit down, and I felt bad because nobody sat with him. It was scary. So I guess I was foolhardy being 15, or I was brave. I don't remember which. I used to go to sit with them, but then you go to sit with them, you have to prepare. You can't just sit with them. What are you going to talk about? Basketball. So I prepared questions. I remember the question I asked one time. I thought it was a really great question. And this is an example to show you that it wasn't so much the particular great piece of loveness. Well, maybe I had to give a good answer. I said to him then, 1965, I said, I understand that, the Akash Baruch has all kinds of plans for the world. But, at the time, there were 2 billion Chinese. So I understand David HaMelech asked, what do you have spiders for? So God showed him a spider was to save him. But why did God make 2 billion Chinese? How does that affect Jewish history? That was my shayla. I thought it was a good question. I wanted to be serious. You know what his answer was? He said, I thought about it, I don't know either. He was also honest. He didn't make up answers just because. Okay, that's really my point. My point is, why should you be Talmid in the sense of the Rhein? Because without being able to write a book about it, like the Lichtensteinian way in Judaism doesn't exist. But the Lichtenstein was Koveya, I think, for all of us. People might be very different. And you ask, what do you think about this? So there were more from people, and less from people, and more right wing, and more left wing, and then whatever, more Haredi, and more Maran. But it's not the particular terutzim to a given kasha, but the unifying theme of taking everything seriously, not negating things just because we didn't do them in the past, but looking for new ways and new things to do and doing them because they're right. And if you do them because they're right, then doing it with unlimited devotion, unlimited power. And even if, I'm talking about myself, how much of that did I absorb in reality? Do I goof off more than, there are things I would be embarrassed of. Aharon once said to me, what are you doing in the evening, Seder? So I rolled my eyes. How do I get out of this exactly? I said, well, I look at this, look at that. I mean, he just assumed I had to be serious during the day, which I don't. Didn't and don't. So I goof off more than that, but when I goof off, at least I feel guilty. As I know, I goof off less, I think, because you can play basketball. I used to have one basketball Seder a week and one ping pong Seder a week. Basketball with my friends and ping pong with after body. That was perfectly okay. We played ping pong in a Lichtensteinian manner, and we played basketball in a Lichtensteinian manner. The fact that I'm also an expert in one or two very old, probably haven't even heard of it, DOS-based computer games, that I don't tell about. That I would tell the thing about. Lichtenstein once called my house on Moshe Shabbos, and one of the kids answered, he wanted to talk to me. And so he said, is Ezra there? So my daughter, Tmimuta, said, no, he's playing basketball. And how old was I then? I don't know, maybe I was pushing 40. And he was pushing 60, a little more. And he said, wow, he's still playing basketball. That's so good. I mean, she couldn't, he sounded jealous. So because of that, I managed to play beyond my 60s, so I could say that I played longer than he did. Until 66. And that was the mess. It wasn't just in there. I learned millions of things from him. But in terms of it's a kind of Yiddishkeit which doesn't consist of A plus B plus C plus C, although there are those things, the articles you can read. I haven't thought about a million things, but it was to take the world and to take your own personal world and take the world around you, and all the time be consistent, remold it to be a basic Mikdash, to be the Malchut Shakai, the Kingdom of Malchut Shakai, to be over Hashem and to make the world into a world of the word of Hashem. And that's something which we have to, which I hope we continue to do, and those Derech Yerubeim who got it in a personal manner. Hopefully, I hope we still make it in yeshiva. We give that message over. I'm not sure if it's as clear as it used to be, because it helps to have one demut that's like shown it. But yeah, hopefully it's in the walls. It's in the stendas. It's in the chodra chadayim. And hopefully, I think that should be carried on. You should be getting it as well.
I'll add 2 quick points.
Because you always have to correct a little...
No, because I'm vainglorious. The first is, obviously, Rav Aharon was gifted. You can just look at me.
We have to see your nice face.
Okay. The one is, obviously, Rav Aharon was gifted in ways that none of us are. But he was the single biggest masmid I ever met in my life. It was as if, if he didn't learn 12 hours a day, he wouldn't know anything. Like, you could not believe his hasmada. At the same time, if you watched him learn, you saw what joy was. He learned with the passion. You heard him in the Beis Medrash. He learned out loud. And he sounded happy when he learned. And sometimes he just listened to the sound of the most authentic Talmud Torah you would ever hear in your life. Just a person who's at love with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and with Talmud Torah. He also never took a break. As Bick described, he never took a break. He was always doing something. I spent a Shabbos at his house, and obviously I went to sleep well before him on Friday night, and the next day he was up learning before I got up. And that was a time where Rav Aharon's father, at the end of his life, was blind and almost completely deaf. When people were in yeshiva, Rav Aharon used to take him by the hand and tell him how many steps. Okay, so he was there for Shabbos at home, and we went to a small minyan, and Rav Aharon took his father and put him next to the Baal Koreh. It was Shabbos Parshas B'chu Kosak. Okay, then in the afternoon we come home, there's lunch. I'm trying to take a nap. Rav Aharon learns with each of his children, sons and daughters, one after the other. It was a long day. And at some point in the afternoon, his father says to him, I remember, Aharon, they spoke in Hebrew, Lo Shamati Kriyat HaTorah. He says, Abba, Shamata, Lo Shai, Shamata. His father insists that he hadn't heard Leini. So Rav Aharon takes out a chumash and basically yells Parshas B'chu Kosai in his father's ear. His father wanted to hear Leini again, so Rav Aharon leined for him again. And then he went back to learning. No naps, no nothing, and he seemed thrilled by it. I remember having seen him at home thinking, he never takes a break. Now, whether he never takes a break because he loves learning so much, or, it doesn't matter. Just the person who was the smartest person I ever met was also the biggest masman I ever met. And the smart thing may be beyond us. The hasmada thing is not. And just one last story, because it's a good story, and then I'll stop. But it also shows an aspect of Rav Aharon's commitment to something. When Rhein used to come in, when we were in YU, so we'd follow him around for the week. So on a Thursday night, we went to hear him speak in KJ. Rabbi Ben Sion Scheinfeld, he's a friend of mine. He drove us back. He spoke in KJ. We went back. There's a dorm in YU. If anybody knows, everybody calls it the morgue. It's Morgenstern dorm, but they call it the morgue. Rav Aharon stayed in the Rav's apartment, which was on the ground floor of morgue, and it was late. We all went up to our rooms. At, 1 in the morning, there was a bomb scare. they told everybody, you have to leave the building. They have to check the building. Someone had called in a fake bomb thing. Okay, so it was funny. It's 1 a.m. People come downstairs in their pajamas and sweatpants and sweatshirts. It was the winter. It was like November time, I think. And you had to stand across the street from morgue while the police, were standing out there for like 45 minutes. It's cold. It's starting to drizzle. Rav Aharon came out still wearing his tie. Right? It's clear he was learning. Okay, he came out still wearing his tie. We're waiting across the street. At some point, somebody says, we should probably go inside. The only place to go is the Beis Medrash. In those days, there was only one Beis Medrash and one in the high school building. So we go in. Okay, most, pajamas, sweatpants, whatever. I promise you, most of the people who went in, it was their first trip to the Beis Medrash. Maybe in their entire stay in YU. So that's 150 guys hanging out in the Beis Medrash. And Rav Lichtenstein sitting up front learning. And somebody comes to me and he says, be fun. Ask Rav Lichtenstein to give us a shiur. We have nothing else to do. Why not? So I go up front and I say, Rav Lichtenstein give a shiur. So he said, okay. So he takes some Sfarim, Ramos, whatever, and he starts giving a shiur, and halachas of pikuach nefesh. Okay, so it's not just that he was ready and he gave it. Okay, he's giving a shiur. I can't remember how long it went, but for the most part, people are listening because it's cool. It's 2 a.m. We're in, pajamas in the YU Beis Medrash, and Rav Lichtenstein's giving a shiur. So, you're sitting around going, this is pretty cool. We're going to tell this story for a long time. Okay? I don't know. It's 2:30 now, and somebody comes to the door, knocks on the door, opens the door, and says, all clear, you can go back. And people get up. And Rav Aharon says, just a moment. He's not finished. Right? Like the idea that he would stop in the middle of a thought, like it never dawned on him. So he finished, another 5, it doesn't matter. He went another 5 minutes. He finished his thought, he summarized it so it was a shiur. But, it didn't matter the circumstances. His commitment to Talmud Torah was such that I don't care that it's 2:15 or 2:30. We're in the middle of an idea. And we have to finish the idea, not to impress anybody, but that's my commitment to Talmud Torah. And people who were in his orbit, just saw that commitment to Talmud Torah, and it stayed with us, and hopefully it stays with you forever. Okay, yashkach to everyone.